Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. So over here, everybody is a third year student. Everybody is third year student. You can answer.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So what are the courses you have already done? What are the courses you guys have already done? Am I not audible? What's the issue? What's the issue? Am I not audible? Yeah, Avideep Khare.
Yes, sir.
Audible.
Yes, sir.
So I'm asking a question. So
Yes,
why
sir.
everybody is mute? I mute everybody because now you can unmute yourself. What are the courses you guys have done before this?
Sir, HS or both mathematics and HS courses?
You can tell me mathematics also. And let's see how many mathematics you guys have learned.
Sir, we have done partial differential equations, probability and statistics, and micro 1 and 2,
Mm-hmm.
and development economics. Uh, and, uh, operations research and uh, statistics for economics, your course. That's that's all I can remember right now.
Okay, very good. So in development economics, what you guys have been taught? Anybody in development economics, what you guys have been taught? What are the topic has been covered?
Some theories of development, then trade and agriculture. Mm, oh yes, sir. And lending, something like that.
So we also learned about the 5 stages of development.
5 stages of development. Okay, वो क्या है? What are those? What are those? What are the 5 stages of development? Whose theory is this? Whose theory is this? 5 stages of development, and what are those?
It is Rostow's theory, sir. As far as I remember. I don't know if it's right.
Who's this?
Sneha.
Huh?
Sneha.
Sneha. Oh, Sneha. Okay. As far as you remember, what does it mean? You have your all the books, all the exercise books, everything, notes, everything with you, right? You
No,
guys,
sir, I'm
you
currently.
you guys use that during examination. But why can't you use that during answering this question? If you can use that during examination, although that's a closed book exam, तुम यहाँ पे भी use कर सकते हो. ठीक से बोलो. What are the topic has been covered in development economics? 5 stages of growth is not the only topic, and the topic that you guys have said that cannot cover the entire syllabus. There must be something else also. You guys can check and tell me. No problem.
So Adam Smith's theory, Rostow's stages of development, and then Malthusian theory of economic development,
Very good.
and
It
measurements
is not
and
Malthusian.
dimensions.
It is Malthusian. It
Okay,
is
sir.
not Malthus. It is Malthus. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Then
And then measurements of human development index,
okay.
and Lewis theory, technology transfer, and agriculture versus industry, and technology and development. Yes, so that's it.
Technology and development. Okay. Very good. Now, all this development theory that you have learned, that you have studied, what have you learned about? First, you tell me how the development is basically measured in standard economic theory. How growth and development is measured in standard economic theory. कौन बोलेगा? Somebody? Somebody can try. When you are saying it's a growth and development, how it is measured in economic theory? How do I know that a country is developed? How do I know a country is not developed, poor, rich? How do I measure? So USA is a rich country or a poor country compared to India?
It is a rich country, sir.
How do you know?
So by GDP, Human Development Index, and there are some other indexes as well.
Then how do we generally measure development?
Um,
Single one.
so Human Development Index.
No, not at all.
Sir, by the produce.
What is the measurement yardstick? I would say single one.
Sir,
that's the only
GDP per capita.
GDP per capita. Okay. Why per capita? First, you tell me it is a real GDP or a nominal GDP.
Real GDP, sir.
Okay. Now, why do you use real GDP, not nominal GDP? Your basic macro question.
So real GDP is the GDP deflated by price.
Okay, fine. I know that. Why do we use real GDP to check whether a country is rich or a country is poor? Why not nominal GDP?
Because in
फिर से बोलो. Increase and decrease of goods and product. What does it mean? Okay. Goods produce, and that is in your formula. What is that? What it is? It is. My question is in your formula that you said PQ. Then which one is you are using? Yeah. And Q for quantity of what? Quantity what? Quantity बोलने से नहीं चलेगा. Quantity sold. Quantity produced. Very good. If that is so, you are right that you are not allowing price to change. You are allowing only quantity to change in the real GDP so that we can actually check how much a country is producing. Now, what is the difference between, let's say, real GDP and real per capita GDP? Because he says that it is we use real per capita GDP to check whether a country is rich or a country is poor. Difference क्या है?
GDP per capita is the GDP divided by its total population. So if a country has higher GDP but lower GDP per capita, it means that it has a high it has a high population and it has a higher GDP because of its population, and not every person in it is rich, or like every person is not for very much able.
Why do we use real per capita GDP generally?
So that we can measure measure how much.
Socho. Just like he answered the question that why we use real GDP, not nominal GDP. He was correct. Now the question is, why do we generally use real per capita GDP to check whether a country is rich or a country is poor?
Because it tells the average income of every person of the country, and real GDP is the.
It does not. Average
So we
income of
take
every
it as average income, like.
Not at all. There is nothing average over here. I am not averaging anything. सोचो फॉर्मूला देखो और सोचो वो क्या दे रहा है. What this formula is giving to me? Real GDP divided by total population of a country. What does it exactly give to me? What is the physical meaning of that? You can use your simple unitary method to answer this question.
It shows us how the GDP is distributed among all the people in the country.
Fine, no, it's fine, but still you can simplify. As I told you, as I am giving you a hint, simply use the notion of your unitary method of mathematics, and you tell me.
It also shows us how much of a GDP does each one in the country contribute.
How much GDP each one of a country contribute?
Each one of the people in the country contributes.
Contribute.
Yes, sir.
ठीक से सोचो. Each one of a country, each one of a person is fine. Contribute. Do you think everybody is contributing in GDP in a country?
No, sir, but we are averaging it out, no?
No, we're not averaging anything over here. There are a lot of person in a particular economy who does not contribute in GDP at all. Let's say a beggar. He belongs to the population, but he does not contribute. When we calculate per capita, those people who does not contribute we also take into account. What is the physical meaning of that then? Real GDP divided by total population of a country. What
Sir,
does it give?
Sir, it shows standard of living.
No. Don't go in that kind of complication. As I told you, it's simple mathematics. Use the notion of your unitary method of mathematics to answer this question. Okay, if 10 table costs 40 rupees, one table costs how many rupees? 10 tables costs 40 rupees. 1 rupees cost, one table cost how many rupees? Standard unitary method कैसे calculate करते हो? बोलो कोई तो बोलो. The price of 10 table is 40 rupees. What is the price of one table? How do you calculate in unitary method?
We divide the total cost by total number of tables.
Then how many? I'm 40 divided by 10 in my example.
Yes.
So
Sir.
one table cost 40 divided by 10. Now using this notion, how do you interpret per capita real GDP?
One person,
individual is producing
that much amount of
Bolo.
money.
Let's say a country has 100 people and the real GDP of this country, let's say 200 US dollar. Then 100 people enjoy 200 US dollar worth of GDP, not contribute. There are a lot of people who does not contribute. So you cannot use the word contribute. 100 people enjoy, let's say 200 US dollar worth GDP. One person enjoy how many? How much? 200 divided by 100. That's your per capita. It's basically how much each person earn. बोल सकते हो, not contribute. Okay. So that is why we generally use real per capita GDP as a measure. That how many each person earn. How many each person earn. वो जो तुम बोले थे, that was correct. That how it is distributed among the country, among the different people in the country. That's correct. But I need absolutely physical definition. It's simply unitary method. If 100% earns 200 unit, 1% earn how many unit? That's your per capita real GDP. And according to you people, per capita real GDP is used to check whether a country is rich or a country is poor, that the country is prosperous or country is not prosperous. You're absolutely sure. And you also said that there are a lot of countries in the world who are really rich. US is one of them. And there are a lot of countries in the world that are really poor. Let's say Zimbabwe is one of them. So this is exactly what we see for last something like, I will say, for the time period 1800 onwards. So it's basically more than 200 years now that these differences in income of different countries are really pronounced. Some countries for last 200 years they have grown, they're really rich, and some countries are really poor. Some countries have grown like anything. Some countries' growth is really low. But if you really go back to the history of civilization, let's say another 200 years or 300 years back, and if you simply compare their GDP, per capita GDP real, you will see that till 1800 there was hardly any difference among the countries. So almost all the countries, they have a almost identical per capita real GDP till 1800 or till 1750. Then suddenly from 1750 onwards, some countries started growing, especially European countries and USA started growing like anything, and other countries lagging behind. Over the time, let's say from 1950 onwards, there are again some countries who started growing, becoming developed, let's say Malaysia, Singapore. So this is basically what we observe from the data. There is a significant difference in the standard of development for different countries. When we measure that in terms of per capita real GDP, a significant difference can be seen from 1750 onwards. But if you go back beyond 1750, you see that countries was almost identical. From 1750, divergence. Some countries are really prosperous, some countries are not. This is exactly what people observed in the data, and people started asking questions that why it is happening, why there is a divergence. This is why this literature or economics of growth started. And this literature is very new. It started, what we say, something like around 1920 or something. People started seriously thinking about that, why do we see this kind of stuff in the data? Some countries rich, their per capita real GDPs are extremely high. Some countries middle income, their per capita real GDP is moderate. And some countries are really poor, their per capita real GDP is very low, very low. And we observed that for last something like 200 years or something, from 1750 or something. But before 1750, and if we go another 200 years back, if we compare, there's hardly any difference among the countries. What happened? This is basically the basic premise of this economics of growth literature. Am I clear? This is exactly, this is the one question we'll try to address in this entire course. Why some countries are rich and some countries are poor, and why some countries growth rate is high and some countries growth rate is low. Two major questions we will ask, and this is basically what I say, the motivation of our this entire economics of growth literature. And if you see the considerable difference in the income level among countries across the world, income level, I'm talking about per capita real GDP. What I have, this table shows there is no country over here till now. It's a world, the entire world. 1960, 1980, 2000, 2017. If you see over here, you see this is the mean per capita real GDP of world income. You see it is rising, it is increasing. So the average income rising. And we have this 111 countries we have taken in our analysis. Data obtained from Penn World Table. It's basically it gives you data for different countries from 1950s onwards. You get consistent data for different countries. Similarly, median, mode, the standard per cap, standard what we call this descriptive statistics that we have learned in our economics of statistics course, that when the data, I give you some data, you can plot a histogram, and that histogram crudely represents the distribution of that particular variable. And from that distribution, I can calculate mean, median, mode, standard deviation, maximum value, minimum value, and number of observation. Some absolutely basic descriptive statistics. And this is the descriptive statistics of world income from 1960 to 2017. And it basically shows that it is rising. This mean is rising. And this is how the distribution of real per capita GDP looks like. Here, density. A density means the fraction of countries. I'm measuring in the y-axis, and the real per capita GDP to measure in the x-axis. And this purple line, that is this line, is basically 1960. And its mean is basically the lowest. And this 2017 line is basically this line. So this magenta line is basically 1960, and this purple line is basically 2017. Two things is very much observable, that not only mean is rising, the distribution is basically moving towards the right side. Its variance is also rising. Its minimum value is almost same, although the number of countries belonging to the minimum level of GDP is basically falling over the time. The maximum value is basically rising over the time. So mean is rising, minimum is almost same, maximum is rising. And then the countries belonging to the minimum income, that means the number of poor countries, which is represented by this vertical distance. If you see this magenta line and the purple line, if you compare, you see the number of poor countries is basically throughout the world is basically falling down. And again, if you compare this magenta line and the purple line in the maximum level of income, you see that number of countries belonging to the maximum level of income is basically rising over the time. The vertical distance of this magenta line is lowest, and the vertical distance of this purple line is highest. It basically shows that the countries, number of rich countries is rising over the time, number of poor countries is falling over the time. The number of poorest countries is basically falling over the time. So this is how the distribution look like, and the mean, the average income of average world income is basically rising over the time. So this is basically one of the observation, one of the stylized facts that we will see what is happening across the countries. But if you take all the countries together, and if we consider world one particular country, and if somebody asks you how the distribution of world income looks like and how it is changing over the time for something like, let's say, for last 50-60 years, this is how it is changing over the time. 1960 is basically the magenta one, and the purple one is basically 2017. Then we also have distribution of 1960, this green one, this blue one is basically 2000. And if we really compare, the two or three things is basically coming very evident about the world income. First of all, world income is rising over the time. The average world income is rising over the time. Number of poorest country falling, number of richest country rising. Minimum value of income almost remains same, but the maximum value of income is rising over the time. And you see, if you see especially this blue line and the purple line, you will see there is a hump at the highest income level also. There are some concentration of countries over here at the income level 10 onwards, per capita real GDP logarithm, the 10 onwards. That means there is a concentration of rich countries over here. And this is basically, we will see it is happening because some country is basically becoming richer over the time from 2000 onwards. And these are basically these growth miracle countries we will discuss. These are Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, these are the countries. Because of these are the countries, that is why we see a hump over there, the concentration of rich countries over here. So these are the points. Average world income is rising. Minimum world income remain almost same, but maximum world income is rising. Number of poorest countries falling, number of richest countries rising, and there is a concentration of countries at the higher income level, especially from 2000 onwards. This is a pattern we see in last 50-60 years in the world income, and we ask question that why do we see this pattern? Any question? Any question? Anybody? Adrija Odhikari, are you here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you are here. Acha, if you use your the simple notion of you that what we have discussed in our economics of statistics course, suppose you, 1970, 111 countries, I give you the data of real per capita GDP. And if I tell you by your hand, you cannot use any computer softwares or anything. You can use only a pen and paper. Give me or plot the distribution of that income. How do you do it? It's a continuous one, fine, but you can obviously draw something that crudely represents this continuous distribution. How do you do it? This is exactly what people do before this advancement of this computer softwares and everything. People used to do that, and they get a figure very close to this kind of distributions. So for the year 2017, if I give you world GDP data for 111 countries, and I give you a pen and paper, Adrija Odhikari, please tell me, how do you get a figure that crudely represents this kind of distribution?
So I'm not sure if I understood the question properly.
Which language you are comfortable? Hindi?
So I'm
अगर तुम्हें
comfortable in
2017 का रियल पर कैपिटा जीडीपी का डेटा दिया जाए फॉर 111 कंट्रीज, एंड अगर तुम्हें बोला जाए यू कैनॉट यूज एनी कंप्यूटर सॉफ्टवेयर्स, how do you plot a figure that crudely represents this kind of distribution? And we have done this in our statistics for economics course. You can see this is the application of those techniques. Obviously, you won't get this smooth curve, but you get something, a figure which crudely represents this smooth curve.
a histogram.
Okay, very good, a histogram. If you draw a histogram, if you see the x-axis and y-axis, what we are measuring. I'm measuring real per capita GDP. इसका data तुम्हें दिया हुआ है, and you have 111 countries with their corresponding log real per capita GDP values. Over here, we are measuring density. In your histogram, what do you measure in the y-axis?
So we have the relative frequency density.
Exactly, relative frequency density. How do you calculate the relative frequency density? Let's say a relative frequency density for a group of countries which is belonging to between 6 and 7, whose log real per capita GDP belonging to between 6 and 7. how do you calculate the real frequency density?
So we take the population.
Population.
I
There's no
mean, so
सोच के बोलो. इस figure में बोलो तो मैं this figure, if you concentrate, what are we measuring in the y-axis? What does this density represent here?
the countries.
Fine. Now, countries means number of countries.
Yes, sir.
सोच के बोलो. The area of this entire curve or any particular curve, if you take the area of the curve 2017, it has to be 1. The number of countries or something else.
So
Related question. Histogram में भी area 1 होना चाहिए. The histogram that you will plot, if it is
we take-
represents at least, हाँ बोलो.
So number of countries that are there in one interval divided by the total number of countries.
And multiplied by, तुम density from frequency density बोले हो. Fine, I take your answer. You're actually talking about the relative frequency over here, and that
Yes,
relative frequency is basically number of countries belonging to a particular bin. That bin represents basically the interval of income, right?
Yes.
Area 1 होगा. The area of the entire histogram will be the sum of the area of all the bins,
Yes, sir.
right? What is the
Yes.
area of the bin? Height is basically the relative frequency.
It has to be 1.
किसका 1 होगा? ठीक से बोलो. तुम लोगों के पास मेरा GDP हिस्टोग्राम उसका नोट भी है. You can use that. The question is very simple. What do you measure? A relative frequency in the y-axis or a relative frequency density in the y-axis?
So we take the relative frequency density.
Then what is the difference between relative frequency and relative frequency
We
density?
divide it by the class width.
Divided by the class width or multiplied by the class width. देख के बोलो.
So
मुझे पता नहीं.
we
I forgot.
we divide it by the class width.
Divided by the class width. That means relative frequency divided by the class width, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. फिर से मैं बोल रहा हूँ. That means you are in the numerator, you have a number of countries belonging to a particular class of income divided by total number of countries multiplied by the class width of that particular class, right?
Yes, sir.
ये class width से multiply क्यों कर रहा हूँ मैं? नीचे वाला डिनोमिनेटर क्लास विड्थ से क्यों मल्टीप्लाई हो रहा है? मैं बोला था.
We need a relative frequency density here, so because it's a frequency
Why?
density.
Okay, fine. You tell me that then what is the area of that particular bin? That bin is nothing but a rectangle. What is the area of that particular bin? Whose y is basically frequency density and whose x is basically a class width of a particular income class. What is the area of the bin? Anybody can answer.
So for the entire thing, it will add up to 1 for
particular
1.
bin. One particular bin.
It will be the relative
Relative
it will be
frequency.
relative frequency.
That means each bin representing relative frequencies. The area of each bin is the relative frequency of that particular class. And that is why if we add them together, we get entire area equals to 1, right?
Yes, sir.
Exactly. So we adjust that in such a fashion. So in the y-axis, you are correct that you are measuring the relative frequency density. How the relative frequency density is calculated? Number of countries belonging to that particular income class, whole divided by total number of countries multiplied by the width of the class. If we define in that fashion, then area of each bin is nothing but the relative frequency, and if we add the area of each bin, we get the area of the entire distribution. It becomes 1. Fine. So this is exactly what you need to do. First of all, you have to draw a histogram. That means from lowest income to highest income, you classify the data. Then you determine a particular class width. The formula is also given in your note of economics of statistics. And how do we determine the class width and number of class and everything? Using that formula, you do that and you plot a histogram. If you plot the histogram, what you find, not a very smooth curve like this, but that histogram will crudely represent this distribution. So before the advancement of computer and computer softwares, people used to do that in that fashion. And they said that this is the distribution. Now over the time, the computer has come and we can get this continuous kind of distribution by reducing the class width continuously. So if you have a very small class width, the histogram will give you this kind of smooth figure. This is exactly, you can say, the distribution that I am representing over here. It is basically the histogram for different years. Histogram for 1960, histogram for 1980, histogram for 2000, and histogram from 2017. And if we compare this is some 3 or 4 important points emerges. First of all, average world income is rising over the time. Secondly, the minimum value of average world income remains almost unchanged, but the maximum value of average world income is rising. Third point, number of poorest countries across the world falling down, number of richest countries across the world is rising, and there is a concentration of countries at the higher income level because of this extra hump over here. You have a bimodal distribution. There is a mode over here. Let's say this blue line 2000, there is a mode over here and there is a mode over here. Purple line, you also have a bimodal kind of distribution. So that means bimodal means at the higher side of the income level, there are some concentration of countries. And we will see these are the countries, basically Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, those countries over here. These are the 4 major observation that is actually coming up from this distribution. And people ask question that why do we see that? What is happening that the world income is rising? What is happening that the number of poorest countries are falling down, number of richest countries are rising? What is happening? What happens to these countries? Why suddenly they become rich? They were really poor before 2000, fine. But why suddenly they become rich? You see, this is your 1960. At the higher income level, there is no hump, only one mode. But you go to 1980, you have a mode over here. There is a mode over here. So there are some concentration of countries at the middle income. There are some concentration of countries at the higher income. Same thing you are happening, some concentration of countries at the higher income level. In fact, if you compare the concentration of countries, that is basically the income is rising. The hump is basically around 10 for the year 1980. But for the year 2017, the hump is basically around 11. So these countries who are gradually becoming rich from 1980, they are getting more rich over the time. Very important observation. Very simple figure, but it is giving me very important 5 and 6 observation. फिर से मैं observation बोल रहा हूँ. Average world income is rising over the time. Minimum world income is almost unchanged, but the maximum world income is rising over the time. Number of poorest countries almost number of poorest countries falling over the time, number of richest countries rising over the time, and there are some countries that are becoming rich from 1980 onwards, and they are giving this extra hump at the higher income level. And that hump from 1980 was something like at income level log real per capita GDP around 10. But that hump is also that income level for those countries are basically rising over the time also. These are the 5 major observations we see, and people ask question that what is happening? Why do we see this kind of observation? Any question? Is this figure clear to everybody?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
And I think that let me just meeting attendance list. This is, what is the date today? 10/8/2021. So I have downloaded. Let me just save it. Your attendance first. Very good. It is saved. Yeah. Now I think it is clear to you people that how do we relate our economics of statistics course, that why have we spent so much of time on this histogram plot in our statistics or economics course? Because it has an application. It has application in other subjects also, but obviously after statistics of economics, I am teaching economics of growth, and I know that the application of histogram is going to come. And this is the application of histogram. I am giving you world income, you plot your histogram, and you compare how the histogram is changing. And if you compare, these are the 5 observations will come to your mind, and this is exactly what people observe, and people started asking questions. Not only the individual countries are also getting rich. Individual countries actually getting richer over the time, and the across entire distribution, the number of poorest countries falling, number of richest country rising. So the entire distribution is gradually shifting to the right side, and that is basically reflected. The average world income is rising, and there is some countries at the higher income level concentrating, and their income level is also rising from 1980 onwards. These countries, we will see these countries, we'll call it growth miracle countries. So this is basically the standard, one of the major motivation. If you open any economics of growth book, this is the motivation. I think if I go over here, I can show you. I think no, I have not written the references over here. The references you can write down if you have your pen and paper. The basic book, the 2 books we will follow. One is Introduction to Economic Growth. Introduction to Economic Growth, 3rd edition. Introduction to Economic Growth, 3rd edition. It is written by Charles I. Jones. Charles I. Jones. Let me spell it out. Charles spelling is Charles. I. Jones, Jones. One author, first author. The second author of this book is Dietrich Vollrath. So let me spell it out. Dietrich. Dietrich. Dietrich Vollrath. 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 This is the basic book we are going to follow in this course. Along with this book, we are going to follow another book. Let me tell you the name of that book. Economic Growth, second edition, Economic Growth, second edition, written by Robert J. Barrow and Xavier Salai Martin. Let me spell it out. Robert, R-O-B-E-R-T, J, Barrow spelling is B-A-R-R-O, and Xavier Salai Martin. Xavier spelling is X-A-V-I-E-R, and Salah E. Martin. So SALA-I-M-A-R-T-I-N. So these are the two books we are going to follow in our entire course. Introduction to Economic Growth by Jones and Walrath, and Economic Growth by Barrow and Salai Martin. Soft copy of both the books are available. Fine, you can download and you can start working. And if you open any of this book, the very first chapter, the motivation of economic growth, you will see this figure. You see this figure. 1960, 1980, 2000, 2017, especially for last 50 and 60 years, how the income level of the entire world has changed. And you this and I what I said about the observation, those 5 and 6 observations, you can actually observe from this figure. Okay, any question? Anybody, any question? Dashrath Meena.
यस सर.
समझ में आया?
हाँ,
हिस्टोग्राम याद है?
थोड़ा बहुत तो याद है सर.
हाँ,
याद है सर.
याद
थोड़ा
है।
बहुत.
क्लास नोट जो मैं भेजा था वो तो है ना तुम्हारे पास,
है सर.
इकोनॉमिक्स ऑफ ग्रोथ का, तो वहां से थोड़ा सा देख लो.
ठीक है सर.
So we have developed that histogram, how to plot histogram and everything we have learned in our economics of growth, and this is the application, that this histogram we are using to characterize the world income level, how it is changing over the time, and how countries are changing position along the world income level. Fine. So this is the first class today. Since this is the first class, I am not going to take more longer. Generally, the 2-hour class I take generally 1.5 hours and 1.5 hours 40 minutes. From next class that will be so, but this is the first class. I am taking only 1 hour. So that's the end of today's class. You can leave. Thank you very much. Please stay safe.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
sir.
Okay, sir.